Welcome to the Amalfi Set video by Elio Atelier. This is part 2 out of 2. We finished sewing the top in the last video, and now we'll be adding buttonholes and buttons. Then we'll sew up the bloomers to complete the project. Typically, buttonholes are placed on the wearer's right for females and left for males. But it really doesn't matter, you can choose whichever side. I'll be doing my buttonholes on the left side. Buttonhole placement will depend on button size. You can go really big like this. I wouldn't go bigger than this. You can add 3. I'm going to do these small round 2-hole buttons. I can add a 4th, but we'll only do 3 for this video. After you decide on your buttons, we can mark the button placement. Mark the center back, which is 3/8 of an inch from the finished edge. I'm marking the top of my first buttonhole about 1/4 inch below the top edge, or right around the stitches on the center back line. Then I'll mark the bottom of my buttonhole on the center back line. The length of the buttonhole is approximately 1/8 of an inch longer than your button. I mark center of button to center of button approximately 2 inches apart. Remember, my measurements may not be same as yours. It'll all depend on your button size and the amount of buttons you have. I'm placing the rest of the buttons on the center mark to make sure it looks good overall. Now I'll mark the remaining second and third buttonholes. Again, the length is about 1/8 inch longer than your button. If you're doing a large button, you might even want to go 1/4 inch longer than the length of your button. I'll go ahead and mark my button placement on the other side. I'm lining up the edges of the placket, then pushing a pin in the center of the buttonhole through the other side of the placket on center back. I didn't mark the center back line on the other placket, but you can certainly do so to double check your pins are on center back. Carefully lift up so your pins are in place. Then mark the button placement. Again, button placements are center of buttonholes on center back line. Remove the pins. And now we have button and buttonhole placements completed. This is my buttonhole foot for my machine, and it has an adjustable holder in the back that cradles the button, which then gauges the exact length needed for the buttonholes. If you have this, you don't need to mark the top of your buttonhole, just the bottom of all your buttonholes. But I think it's just good practice to always mark the length on your project. I just replaced the foot on my machine. Set your dials to the buttonhole stitch. I'm using a Singer Heavy Duty 4452, and these are my settings. Your settings can be different depending on the machine. You'll always want to do a test run on a scrap piece of fabric to make sure you're pleased with the results. I'm using this tiny piece, so I have to give a little tug to get it started. Here's a close-up. I'm not liking how the return side, which is the right side of the buttonhole, how it looks. The threads are not dense as the left side, so I need to make adjustments. Mine is located on the side of the machine. Check your manual if you need to make buttonhole adjustments. I'm doing another test run. It's better, but not quite there, and make another adjustment. Here's a close-up of the before and after. See the return stitches on the right side of each buttonhole. I'm now ready to go directly on the garment. My machine is now set up correctly. I'm placing my needle right at the bottom mark of the buttonhole. And since I'm using the button gauge, the machine will know when to come back down the other side. But if you don't have this, you'll manually come back down when your needle hits the top mark of the buttonhole. My first one is complete. I go directly to the second and third. My buttonholes are finished, and I'm now ready to cut them open. Grab a seam ripper and a pin. I'm placing my pin at the top of the buttonhole. Then starting at the bottom of the buttonhole, I'm cutting through to the top. Repeat. My button placements are already marked on the other placket. I'm ready to sew my buttons. I'll speed through this. The back closure is complete, and we'll now sew our bloomers. If you haven't already cut your bias strips for the bloomers, you can do it now. Your bias width will be 1 inch, and since I'm doing a size 0 to 3 month bloomer, I cut my length to 14 inches. See page 4, table C, for measurements per size. Take your bias strips and on one side fold and press 1/4 inch. We're not going over raw edge and seam finishings here since we already did this in the last video, but if you aren't doing French seams, you'll line wrong sides together and sew side seams and crotch with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can also fast forward and skip this next portion where I'll be doing French seams. We'll have wrong sides facing each other and sew sides and crotch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. My first set of stitches for French seams are done. I like to press seams open before pressing them again to one side. Then trim the seam allowance down to 1/2, so that makes it 1/8 of an inch. Turn inside out, so wrong sides are now on the outside and correct sides are facing. Sew sides and crotch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. My French seams are done. Take the prepared bias strip. I don't need this pointy bit on the end. Align the raw edge of the bias strip, the side that is not folded, to the leg opening. I like to start and end my casing on the back side of the bloomer, near but not on side seam to avoid any bulk. Turn back a 1/4 inch and place a pin. Sew from the 1/4 inch turn back around the entire leg opening, and once you reach close to the other side, turn back the end of the bias strip so that the folds are now kissing. I'll show this on the machine. I'm sewing with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And lifting my presser foot while the needle is down and pivoting. Now I'm getting close to the other side. Have your scissors handy. Fold back the other end so that both folds are kissing. Create a crease and trim off about a 1/4 inch from the crease. Continue sewing to the end with new fold in place. Folds are kissing. Let's do the other side. I'm trimming off the pointy ends of my bias. Folding back the raw edge a 1/4 inch. Then sew with the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, catching the fold in place. When the curves get tighter around the crotch area, go slow. You can bring the presser foot up with the needle down and pivot to make sure you're not pulling or stretching, and overall getting neat sewing. I'm close to the end. Folding back until folds are kissing, create a crease. Then trim off excess a 1/4 inch from the crease. Continue sewing to the end. The first set of stitches for our leg casings are done. At this point, you can understitch. Understitching always looks better, but it is optional, and I won't do it in this video. Next, we trim down the seam allowance about half. Turn your bias to the inside of the garment and place pins. I'm also going to prepare my waist casings now so I don't have to come off the machine and do it later. Fold and press 1/4 inch. Fold and press again 3/8 inch. We're ready to go to the machine. Edge stitch very close to the folds, all around the legs. For the waist, edge stitch, but leave a 1 to 2 inch opening to insert the elastic. I'll do the waist first, starting around center back. I'm positioning my needle so it's very close, about 1/16 inch from the edge of the fold. Sometimes when you do French seams, it can get quite thick, so I always have my hump jumper handy, which also helps my stitches look even at the thick spots. Using it again here. Left a little gap to insert my elastic. Next, I'll do the leg opening. I already did one side. I'll show the next. At the tight curves, which is at around the crotch, I go slow, pivot with the pressed up foot up, and needle down. We'll now insert the elastic. You can find the recommended elastic measurements in the guidebook. If you decide to size down on your bloomer, just remember to use the appropriate elastic length for your child's size so it's comfortable on them. Grab a safety pin or a hairpin. The casings are a bit narrow, a little less than 3/8 inch, so if you're using a safety pin, you'll have to use a rather smaller size for the head to easily slide through. I like to make my markings at the end of my elastic, so I know the elastic hasn't twisted when I sew them together. Pull in through the other side. I'll speed this up. Grab a pin and pin the ends in place with about 1/2 inch overlap. going onto the legs. Marking the elastic so I know it hasn't twisted along the way. Insert through the channel and pull through. Pin in place with a 1/2 inch overlap. Repeat the other leg. We'll sew the elastic together. Press her foot is down. I remove my pin and do a couple lines of zigzag stitches. My elastics are sewn together. And we now pull and even out our gathers. I'll do this on speed. Almost finished, and it's looking really cute. Last step is to close the casings. I'm just taking a quick look on the inside, making sure everything looks good and my needle didn't fall off anywhere. Finish the waist on the machine. Finish the leg casings by hand. You can do a simple whip stitch. Get your needle and thread. I'm making several stitches to close it up. I see I missed a bit, so come through the other side. Make one last stitch, then make a knot. And one last knot. Repeat the other side. And here's a close-up. Finish the waist on the machine. We're done with our set. Let's take a final look. First with the bloomers. And then our top. Let's take a look in the inside. And this completes the Amalfi set. Here are some alternate ways you can use the same pattern. This is a size 9 to 12 month in a cotton broadcloth. I wanted to show you this is an example of where the neck and armholes can get stretched out when you skip the stay stitching. It's not really noticeable at the armholes, but pretty obvious at the neck. I wanted to make it very casual and slightly less structured, so I eliminated the facings at the armhole and finished it with a bias binding on the inside as the neck. I kept the facing at the hem. This one is a 6 to 9 months and a lightweight linen. I wanted it super breezy and airy for summer and eliminated the facings at both armhole and hem. I finished the armhole with a bias binding on the inside and a basic rolled hem at the bottom. I made a set for my daughter for this year's Santa pictures, a size 18 to 24 month in both bloomer and top. For the top, everything's as is. I used the facings at armholes and hem and did the binding at the neck. But added a bow out of black twill fabric that I just stitched on. Then a rounded collar with lace trim. Everything else is the same. And this one is for her friend. This is a pretty thick flannel made of cotton and wool. I sized down in the bloomers and 18 to 24 months in the top. I wanted to make the top really clean without any stitching visible on the outside, but still structured. So I used the facings at armhole and hem, but did an invisible stitch at the outer edges on the inside of the garment. Also, the neck is the same construction as the pattern, just the binding is on the outside rather than the inside of the garment. I binded the edges of the armhole and hem facings, then did an invisible stitch. Here's the back with faux horn buttons. For the next one, I did the same. I wanted it very clean on the outside. This is a cotton velveteen fabric, so I didn't stitch through when attaching the facings. I added a frilly lace at the neck. And the neck is same as the pattern. I used a lighter weight fabric in black for the bias. Crystal shank buttons on the back. Super high-end details. And just unnecessary for a typical baby's outfit, but I wanted to do a special bespoke kind of version. Instead of turning in the raw edges, I binded them in a lighter weight contrast fabric, then invisible stitched them together to the garment. Here are the bloomers with similar finishing on the inside.